This is Caryl Pagel, and I'm reading Old Wars. You are trying to remember how it happened. You are trying to remember these events in a sensible order. The narrator, you think, met the old woman on a train. She had been to war, or at least you think you recall reading that she said she had. The story started on the train. The narrator in this case was mostly incidental. The narrator in this case was made to listen patiently and account for. The woman's tale, you recall, was too strange to be told straight. You needed to hear it from a distance. From another mouth or source, the narrator met the woman on a train. She had been to war. The story was about the woman and her experiences at war, or more precisely, in it, as a victim and a corpse, and someone who was marched straight to and through the brink of death, who gazed deep into death's vile and wintry irises before saving the crowd of innocent people she had been marching with. They were on the side of the road. You remember this detail. They were on a dusty black road being marched to death, and you know this because the narrator is delivering this information within a story via another story, a story told by the same old woman who may or may not have existed, whom he may or may not have met on a train, who may or may not, but most likely was, a part of the war. She was not a hero. She must have been a hero, you think, for having protected all of those people, for sacrificing her own soul, her own hands, her own fragile sense of self, and yet there are no heroes here. Not the patient narrator, not you for trying to remember, not even the woman who told the story, for war knows no heroes and makes a fool of every witness which, right now, through memory, is both you and this incidental narrator and whomever you are telling the story to. You are trying to remember how it happened. There was a woman on a train. This woman told a story not to you, but you read the story that she told from the narrator's point of view, and now you know it. How she abandoned her own consciousness to swap bodies with the officer. She parted with her own old heart. She left her mind behind. She became a monster and a master, and through this brave and magical transformation was able to save a small population of souls, or so she said that day to the one you know as her trainmate. This is Caryl Pagel, and I'm reading Telephone. There was fear involved, yes. Some fear and hesitancy to discuss what you knew you had done but had not yet told anyone. It was nothing. You discussed it for hours, all that nothing and what nothing meant, what a shame it would be to allow the nothing to decay, to fade and fly and die like all those nothings you both had had before. It felt like a new nothing, but you knew instinctually in your frantic animal soul that all nothing sustains itself the same way, by expanding, cracking, swallowing itself and all around it, by colliding with old nothings. You knew and discussed what a nothing all your nothing was, and yet you could not find an end to it. This kind of nothing kept going. It kept going into itself and back out again around the day, winding itself through you and whispering things concerning you across the wire and in sleep's abysmal strangle, and after all that talk you felt true, like a new version of yourself you never knew. A version of the very dreadful nothing that you had always had a vision of yourself becoming. This is Caryl Pagel, and I'm reading Mausoleum. The night behaved exactly as you thought it would, as you saw it would, as you saw it unfold and unravel and pre-occur in a previously you now know prescient premonition. The details are irrelevant. You saw the night tumble forth anxiously with rare nerves as if swerving away from a ghost train. Perhaps it was almost dusk. There was, or maybe there could have been, a dreadful storm, but there was no storm. You had the feeling that it was later than it really was. Maybe it was a different day, or if the same day, then you saw this day tilt and stretch and sway and strain itself against the previously aforementioned vision, as, to be honest, at this point, you knew it would. The version of the night you saw occurred as a sudden shot straight through the actual night that was just about to start occurring. The night tried to hold itself upright, tried to be true to its given name, to remain faithful and patient, such a great trait through sorrow and flawed stakes through the terrible rest of dreamers, each reading their own imperceptible story. You were worried. The precise details are irrelevant. The events of the night occurred as observed, not set forth by you, but seen into and through, planned perhaps by the unseen forces that occasionally reveal an intricate narrative briefly perceivable. It was the next day, or that same day, or a different night, that you found yourself taking a quick picture of the man as he stood patiently waiting beneath his own engraved name in the blazing rays of the graveyard. That name, his same name, was presently labeling a mausoleum. No strangers were present, or if they were, you couldn't see them. There was no proof. That night, and then again that same day, you knew that when he looked at you, you would shift your gaze, that when he looked at you, you would hide. Perhaps it was night, perhaps a different day. You knew you would veil your startled stare so that he could not grasp or catch your very instant vision of his death in the black and brittle, damp and bewildered echo of your loud eyes. Because as you found then, and as you note now, there is never any proof. There is never any sufficient evidence. So to you, there is also no truer, tender kindness than disguise. But recognize, one can always find that loving feeling by returning to the mausoleum. This is Caryl Pagel, and I'm reading 4 Dead Men. He took a solitary walk across the region. He couldn't stop, he couldn't stop, he couldn't pause, he couldn't stop. He sought to circle the space. He needed to circle the space you see. He needed to see the place you see. He could only fathom the place he knew you see if he saw it plainly as he circled, and you heard that he recorded his thoughts on the walk at the hospital. His walk began, so the story goes, as the dog days were drawing to an end. It was the finish of one mood and the commencement of another. He was going to conclude unmoving. He knew, you see, he would eventually break down immobile, you know, only realizing, in retrospect, after the act of walking, but before recording, that he could remember the faces he encountered if he began to watch once more, if he took a walk around the region in his mind, if he recalled the damage that he'd done and wrote it down. At that time, this man, this first dead man, was attempting to make things appear, you see. He was attempting to reclaim that which, in his mind, had wholly vanished. He was feeling, in fact, a little apparitional. He was attempting to think himself healthy, you know. He wanted to walk himself well, and so he wrote down what he saw, and you experienced what he saw within the stretched and spooky spiraling sentences that unraveled and expanded as a rough path parallels a road that no one is headed down. They wouldn't stop. He couldn't stop. He disclosed, in prose, the destruction of important historical buildings. He witnessed the wreck of ancient languages. He saw old ruins which recalled him to new ruins, some of which he was seeing again in his mind, and some of which he read about, and some of which you were reading about, and some of which he knew from the very few people he had stopped long enough to talk to. This man, this first dead man, admired the wildest gardens, but he also couldn't stop imagining his past friends' faces. He wrote he couldn't stop thinking dead strangers' thoughts. You read he couldn't stop and didn't want to. You are shocked now up from a page on which he is describing the interesting history of herring, to see another man hovering in your doorway. This other man, this second man, is living, and you loved him, but he can't stop, he can't see. He needs someone to take him to the hospital. He needs someone to circle his sickness. He needs you, and only you, to attend to his sickness, but you're not. You're going to stop. You read instead a book about a man who has recently been in the hospital. This man is leaving in part to see the now empty home of a friend who had recently passed, in part perhaps because he should have remained in the hospital. Instead, this man, this third man dead, is visiting his friend's home just after he died, a suicide, with the hope that he, the third dead man, could inhabit again the tone and humor and luminous, brilliant, beautiful, significant, wonderful, loving, tortured, sorrowful, stagnant, angry, awesome, puzzled, tragic, hurtful, magic, difficult mind of his dear friend during the time in which he still survived, when this man was not yet ill, but lived instead to write about architecture and remarkable buildings. This is Caryl Pagel, and I'm reading The Heart. The heart just won't stop. You try and you try. You yank up plies and push it down deep under the floorboards. It won't stay, it won't stop. That's not quite the right account, but you are attempting to restate the plot. In this case, the floor becomes a door into a muddled memory of a gory story, and twice now you've confused the scene of a hacked-up corpse with the end of another horrifying chronicle which, of course, couldn't have happened exactly the way you explained it, and in fact might even have occurred in your own life. Now observe how, despite a lack of accurate facts, you will still permit yourself to speak, for to tell a story poorly is an ancient disease. The woman described the instant in which she heard a recording cry out from the mouth of a headstone. There was just one button, imitating death's tone. The device belonged to one already gone, and he was long in professing his affection for his once still grieving, breathing love, his living other. Though the woman said she noticed the bride's name buried far from the persistence of her groom's unrelenting passing, his strange refrain, the story of the heart is that it just won't stop. It talks and talks.